My brother said it with a smile, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it with anger. We were standing in my parents' driveway in Mississauga, late October, the kind of cold that sneaks under your collar before you notice it. My mother had just finished telling everyone at Thanksgiving dinner how proud she was of him, how he was finally getting his life together, how the new contracting business was going to be something special, and my brother, Fletcher, 34 years old, standing there in a jacket I recognized from a roots sale I'd seen online for $380, turned to me with that smile and said, "You've always been the responsible one. That's just who you are." Like it was a compliment. Like being the one who quietly covers everything while someone else gets celebrated is a personality trait and not a slow drain on everything you've built. I drove home that night to my apartment in Scarborough and sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time without going inside. My phone had 2 missed calls from my father already. I knew what they were about. I didn't need to listen to the voicemails to know. I'd been knowing for 6 years. I should explain how it started, because it didn't start badly. Most things that hollow you out don't. My father had a back injury in 2018. He worked in warehouse logistics for most of his adult life, and one afternoon a pallet came down wrong, and that was it. 2 surgeries, partial disability, and the end of the only career he'd ever had. My mother worked part-time at a medical clinic doing reception, which covered groceries and utilities, but not much else. The mortgage on the house in Mississauga, the car payments, the gap between what came in and what needed to go out. It quietly fell onto whoever was closest and most capable of carrying it. That was me. I was 26 at the time, working in regulatory compliance for a mid-sized logistics firm downtown. Not wealthy, but stable. I had a 1-bedroom in Scarborough, a used Honda Civic, and enough left over each month to start building something real. When my father first called and explained the situation, I didn't hesitate. I set up a recurring e-transfer for $800 a month into the household account. It felt right. It felt like what you did. Fletcher was 28 then and between things, as he usually was. He'd done a year of a trades program at George Brown, dropped it, worked construction for a while, then pivoted to what he called exploring options. My parents called it a difficult period. They said he needed time to find himself. They said he was sensitive in a way I wasn't, which I understood to mean that disappointment rolled off me and stuck to him, and so everyone worked harder to keep him from being disappointed. I didn't begrudge him that at first. I genuinely didn't. People figure things out at different speeds, and I wasn't the kind of person who needed credit for helping my own family. But something shifts when help becomes expectation. When it happens so gradually you can't point to the exact moment. But one day you look up and realize the entire architecture of your family's financial life has been quietly built around your paycheck, and nobody thought to mention it to you. The calls from my father stopped asking how I was doing around year 2. They became briefings. The furnace needed servicing. The property tax bill came in higher than expected. My mother's dental wasn't covered under the provincial plan, and the out-of-pocket was significant. He delivered these updates the way you'd deliver them to a bank. Factual, slightly hurried, with the understanding that the appropriate response was a transfer confirmation. I started sleeping badly around that time. I'd lie awake running numbers in my head, calculating how much cushion I had, whether I could absorb another unplanned expense, whether the savings account I was trying to build was actually growing, or just treading water. I was 30 years old eating leftovers for 4 days straight after a car repair to make sure my monthly transfer went out on time. Meanwhile, Fletcher had found his footing, or what my parents described as his footing. He'd started a small contracting business, renovation work, mostly kitchens and bathrooms. I was glad for him. I told him so. But I started noticing things. A new truck in the driveway, a weekend trip to Montreal he mentioned offhand, new tools that he referenced with a casualness that suggested they hadn't been a stretch. When I asked once, gently, whether the business was doing well enough that maybe he could start contributing to the household, my mother's voice went soft in that particular way it had. "Your brother has overhead, sweetheart. The equipment costs alone are significant, and he's sensitive about feeling like he's not doing enough already." So I didn't push. I went back to my apartment and transferred $800. The first crack appeared 18 months before everything collapsed. I was going through my banking app late on a Tuesday night, not for any particular reason, just the low-grade financial anxiety that had become my baseline. I noticed something odd in the transfer history. The household account I sent money to every month. I'd always assumed it was a joint account in my parents' names, but the account number was one I'd seen somewhere else. I scrolled back through old text messages and found it. A number my brother had sent me 2 years earlier when I'd lent him $400 to cover a supply run for a job he said would pay out in 2 weeks. I told myself I was misremembering. I told myself there was an explanation. I went to sleep and tried to forget about it, but I work in regulatory compliance. I spend my days reading documentation, tracing authorization chains, flagging inconsistencies. My brain doesn't let anomalies go. It files them and circles back. 3 weeks later, I looked again, more carefully this time. The account I'd been sending $800 to every month for 6 years was registered in my brother's name. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't the loud crashing feeling you'd expect. It was quieter than that. It was the particular stillness that comes when something you suspected but refused to believe turns out to be exactly what you suspected. Like the floor didn't drop out, like it had been slowly lowering for years, and you'd only just noticed you were standing in a basement. I didn't say anything to anyone. Not yet. I work with financial records professionally. I know that confronting someone with incomplete information is the fastest way to watch evidence disappear and explanations calcify into something impossible to challenge. So instead, I did what I do at work. I built a file. I went back through 6 years of e-transfer records. I cross-referenced the account numbers. I pulled screenshots of text conversations where my father had described expenses, the furnace, the property tax, the dental bills, and I started looking for whether those expenses appeared anywhere verifiable. Property tax records in Ontario are public. I found 2 years' worth of arrears that didn't match what I'd been told. The furnace company my father had mentioned, I found them on Google, called about service records for that address, was told their last visit was years before the amount I'd been asked to cover. The dental work was the one that broke something open in my chest. I'd transferred $900 in a single payment for my mother's dental. I found a receipt in an email my mother had forwarded to me as thanks. And the date on the receipt was 6 weeks before I'd made the transfer. Someone had held onto that receipt and used it later. I kept building the file, statement exports, screenshots, a notes document with dates and amounts and what I'd been told each transfer was for. I saved everything to a personal cloud drive and backed it up twice. The whole time I kept sending the monthly transfers. I needed them to think nothing had changed. The wedding anniversary party was my brother's idea. My parents were turning 35 years married in the spring, and Fletcher announced, with the enthusiasm of someone who had never once organized anything, that we should throw them a party. A real one. He'd found a banquet hall in Brampton, catered, open bar, the whole thing. He'd already spoken to relatives. He'd already put down a deposit. When he called to tell me, I felt the familiar settling of weight onto my shoulders before he even finished the sentence. I was thinking we split it, he said. 60-40 since you make more. I've already got the deposit down. The total is going to come in around $4,200, $2,500, for a party I hadn't been consulted on, for a venue I hadn't chosen, for a guest list I hadn't seen. How much was the deposit, I asked. $500. I put it on my card. Which card? A pause. What does that matter? I let it go. I said I'd think about it. I got off the phone and opened my file. The party was held on a Saturday in late May. The hall was genuinely nice, round tables with centerpieces, a DJ who knew what he was doing, relatives I hadn't seen in years filing in through the front doors with cards and flowers. My parents were glowing. My mother cried when she saw the room. My father put his arm around Fletcher and said, loud enough for 3 tables to hear, "This is what family means. This kid would do anything for us." I stood near the back and watched. My father found me about an hour in, near the bar. He looked happy, which made what I was about to do feel heavier. "You look tired," he said. "I've been working a lot." He nodded, the way he nodded when he wasn't really listening then. Fletcher did a tremendous job with all of this. He did, I said. And then, because I'd rehearsed this for 3 weeks and I wasn't going to lose my nerve. "I want to talk to you about the household account." His face didn't change immediately. That was the tell. If he'd been confused, his expression would have shifted. Instead, there was a half-second of stillness that told me everything. "What about it?" I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out a folded set of papers. Not everything. I'd made a version of the file that was selective, enough to demonstrate I knew. Not so much that it turned into a legal document at a family party. I set it on the small table beside us. He looked down at it, statement exports highlighted, the account number circled. A row of transfer amounts next to a column of the expenses I'd been told they were covering, with the discrepancies flagged. He was quiet for a long time. "Your brother needed a foundation," he finally said. "We couldn't give him what we gave you. You were always capable. He needed help getting started." I'd thought about how I would feel when I heard the explanation. I'd gone through it in my head a dozen times. I thought I might feel rage. I thought I might feel grief. What I actually felt was a profound, almost peaceful clarity. Like everything I'd suspected, but been too hopeful to fully believe, had just been confirmed out loud by someone who didn't even seem to think it required an apology. "You used my money to build his business," I said. "It wasn't a question. We used your support to keep the family stable. That's what family does." For 6 years. He picked up his drink. "You never said it was a problem, because I didn't know what I was paying for." My mother found us about 5 minutes later. She looked at my father's face and then at the papers on the table, and her expression did something complicated. Not surprise, not quite guilt, something more like the exhaustion of someone who has been managing a secret for a long time and feels relief and dread simultaneously that it is no longer just hers to carry. "We were going to tell you," she said. "When?" She didn't answer. Fletcher came over eventually. Someone must have flagged him. He was still wearing the easy confidence he always wore, but it was sitting differently now, like a jacket that no longer quite fit. He looked at the papers, looked at me, and said, "This isn't the place." "You're right," I said. "It isn't." I picked up the papers, folded them back into my pocket, and did the thing I had practiced the most. I didn't storm out. I didn't make a scene. I found my aunt, thanked her for coming, said my goodbyes quietly, and walked out through the front doors into a warm Saturday evening with the sun still high enough to feel good on my face. I cancelled the standing transfer from my phone before I reached my car. The next few weeks were a flood of messages I didn't reply to quickly. My brother called 4 times in the first 2 days. My father sent a long text that I read once and didn't respond to. My mother's messages were shorter, which somehow made them harder to read. One of them just said, "I don't know how to fix this." Another said, "Your father handles the finances." I trusted him. That was my mistake too. I thought about that second one for a long time. An aunt on my mother's side called me about 3 weeks after the party. She was one of the people who'd been told for years that I was too focused on my own life to contribute much to the family. She'd been told I was the one who didn't call, who didn't show up, who had distanced himself. She called to tell me that she was sorry and that she understood now why she'd been given that version of me. "They needed the story to make sense," she said. "If you were the selfish one, nobody had to ask uncomfortable questions." That was the part that had been quietly hurting me without my having a name for it, not just the money. The version of me that had been circulated in my absence. The character they'd built to justify what they were doing. A son who was difficult, who didn't give, who needed to be managed rather than trusted, and everyone who loved them had believed it because it came from the people they trusted. Fletcher and I haven't spoken since the party, not properly. He sent one message that was mostly about how I'd embarrassed the family in front of relatives. I read it, put my phone down, and went for a walk. I live near a ravine trail in Scarborough, and I've been walking it more lately. There's a part of it where the path dips between 2 steep sides and you can't hear the city at all, just wind and birds and the crunch of your own footsteps. I go there when I need to remember what quiet feels like when it's chosen. I've been working with a financial advisor since June, not because I need dramatic help, but because for 6 years my money went places without my fully understanding where, and I want to be the kind of person who looks at his own finances with clear eyes. The monthly amount I was transferring, over $57,000 across 6 years, not including the one-time requests, is gone. Legally, it was given. I'm not getting it back, and I've stopped thinking about it in terms of recovery. What I've started thinking about instead is what I can build now, with the full amount of what I earn, directed entirely by my own choices. I cleared my credit card. I started an RRSP contribution I'd been putting off for 2 years. I booked a trip to Portugal I'd been cancelling mentally every time a family expense appeared on the horizon. Small things started feeling significant in a way they hadn't in a long time. My father texted me once more about 6 weeks after the party. It was short. Proud people write short messages when they can't be fully honest, because brevity lets them avoid the parts that would require them to say something true. It said, "What you did took something from this family that we won't get back." I read it twice. Then I typed back, "I agree," and left it at that. My mother and I have started talking again, slowly. She calls on Sunday mornings sometimes, and we keep it light. Her garden, a show she's watching, a neighbour's new dog. We don't talk about the money yet. Maybe we will eventually. Maybe we won't need to. She sent me a card for my birthday in August. First time in 4 years she'd remembered the date without being reminded by someone else. Inside she wrote, "I see you more clearly now. I'm sorry it took this long." I kept the card. I'm not sure why. Maybe because it was the first thing in a long time that came from her, that wasn't about what she needed. I still think about that Thanksgiving driveway sometimes. My brother in his $380 jacket, smiling, telling me I'd always been the responsible one. He wasn't wrong technically. I had been. I'd been responsible for things that were never supposed to be mine to carry, and I'd done it quietly because I thought that was what love required. I thought that keeping the peace meant absorbing whatever came at me without protest, that the absence of conflict was the same thing as things being okay. What I understand now is that silence isn't the same as acceptance, and keeping peace at the cost of your own stability isn't generosity. It's just a slower way of disappearing. The ravine trail is icy by November. I wore proper boots this time, new ones, bought without checking my balance twice. The kind of small, ordinary thing that turns out to matter more than you expect. The people who actually love you will not need your depletion to feel secure. That's not a lesson I found in a book. That's something I learned the expensive way, in the specific unglamorous arithmetic of 6 years of bank statements, and a family dinner where the truth finally had nowhere left to hide.